Hi, welcome to Australia. We're going to talk a little bit about jet lag in this video, and I thought I'd make this video really just to give you a little bit of information on what I do, what we do in Formula One to get over the jet lag side of things. It's quite a complex subject and sometimes overly complex. And after 22 years of travelling roughly 220 to 250 days a year, I've tried just about everything to try and come up with solutions for jet lag. And jet lag is a little bit like nutrition, it's a little bit like training. Everyone's different, so people will have their own ways and their own solutions when it comes to jet lag, things they do that are tried and tested that work for them. So I think the idea of these videos really is just to give you ideas based on what works for me that you can then go and put into your own program when it comes to jet lag, just to see how you get on with it. So I'm not saying what I do with jet lag is the best thing since sliced bread and everyone needs to do it, but it's something that hopefully will give you a few different ideas maybe to what you're doing now that you hopefully will find some success with. Australia, we're looking at 10-hour time difference from Europe and an 11-hour time difference from the UK. So it's as far as we go in the season in terms of the time differences from there. And in terms of how I tend to address it, I think jet lag for me, it's a combination of smaller elements coming together as part of a bigger program that are always going to make the biggest difference. And I think with any jet lag program, what we need to try and do is make it easy to adopt. And if you look at traditional ways to get over jet lag, there's ways where you can, when you're at home, start adjusting the time to fit in more with your destination time, which just means either going to bed earlier or later depending on which way you're travelling, and obviously then getting up in the morning earlier or later to go with it. The problem with this is it's not so practical for people. Maybe you can do it for 1 or 2 hours, but to actually be able to completely get into a new time zone when you're at home, if you've got to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning, you can't exactly tell your boss, sorry, I'm going to be in at 2 o'clock this afternoon because I'm adjusting to my destination time. You're probably going to get fired. So there's obviously constraints on that side. Working with light is scientifically proven to help, and it's a big part in terms of the release of melatonin when we expose ourselves to light when we're in our destination. Again, based on whether you're travelling east or travelling west, will depend on when you are supposed to kind of expose yourself to light at different times of the day. Again, it has an element of impracticality about it, because if you're supposed to avoid light in the morning, you're not going to sit in the hotel room if it's a beautiful day outside until you should be getting sunlight. So again, for me, although I think these things work and they've been proven to work, again, if it's not practical, people aren't going to adopt them. So in terms of what we do for jet lag, I'm just writing an ebook on jet lag, and it's up to 40 pages already in terms of how to arrive in better shape, and hopefully that will be ready soon. It goes into a lot more detail with all of these sort of things, but if I condense it for this video and put it into 3 main areas for you, I'd say it's the plane we fly on that makes a difference, it's hydration, and it's not eating on the flights or fasting for a certain period of time. The first thing I do when I'm looking at jet lag is book a certain flight with a certain plane. So I think the first thing and the first element that I look at is what plane am I going to fly on. And with the advances aircraft have been through with regards to materials that are being used, the Dreamliner from Boeing and the A350 from Airbus offer solutions to some of the issues that can make jet lag worse, namely humidity levels and cabin pressure or cabin altitude. What they've basically done after quite extensive research is determined that number one, with regards to cabin altitude, if your body is flying over 6,000 feet in the aircraft, from their research, anything above 6,000 feet can bring an onset of symptoms that we regard as jet lag. So what they've tried to do with these new aircraft is keep the ceiling altitude in those planes at 6,000 feet or lower. Traditionally, if you look at a 747, 777, the cabin altitude is somewhere around 8,000 feet at its maximum. So it's a couple of thousand higher than they deem to be on that cutoff period. So that's one issue with the planes. The other is humidity, and humidity. The main issue with humidity is planes generally have very low levels. 5% is quite common, but it's somewhere between 5 and 20. And dehydration comes on massively with low humidity. So every time we breathe, we're losing moisture when we're on a plane, and the lower humidity levels obviously make that worse. So what the new airliners provide is slightly higher levels of humidity, and it's not a massive difference, but any small difference in the right direction is going to help. So for me, I book on one of either the Dreamliner or the A350, so that I've got slightly higher levels of humidity, so we're not going to dehydrate quite so much. And the cabin altitude is 6,000 feet or lower. So again, some of those symptoms that are inherently jet lag, as we call them, if we can potentially eliminate some of those by just booking onto a better flight, we're already moving ourselves in a better direction. And I think if you haven't flown on one of the new planes, or you haven't really paid too much attention, then maybe you don't recognise the fact that you're feeling better. But when I mention this to other people, people think, hey, yeah, I flew on one of those new planes. My jet lag was a lot better at the other end, or I felt a lot more refreshed than normal, or everything in my nose didn't dry up as it normally would. So people do recognise that they feel better flying on these new planes. So again, like I said, that's the first step, and the first thing that I do when I look at how to arrive in the best shape and reduce the effects of jet lag. The plane we fly on makes a big difference, so that's the first thing. In terms of time adjustment, I think if you're going to travel over a couple of hour time difference, you're not going to notice any jet lag. And if you're, I don't know, going to fly somewhere that's got an 8-hour time difference, if you can shift your body for 1 or 2 hours in the correct direction before you leave, that is going to be beneficial. Like I say, it's I think in Formula One we're quite lucky, because I don't have to be at an office at 8 o'clock in the morning. So for Formula One drivers, the people that work with them, I think we have more flexibility to play around with these sort of things. And honestly, I don't go for a 4 or 5 hour time shift before I leave, but I will try and make 1 or 2 hours difference in the 4 days, 5 days leading up to the day of travel. So that's one thing that we can do. For me, the biggest thing that I found works with regards to reducing or eliminating to a certain degree jet lag is fasting on the flights. And I've played around with so many different versions of this. There was a diet that came out a long time ago, which I based a lot of this on, which was a series of feast fast for the 4 days leading up to the flight, fasting throughout the flight and carrying on that process when you land. And I think, again, for me, it's just one of these sort of things that it just gets a bit too complicated, fasting, feasting, and people tend to forget that sort of thing unless you're really dedicated and you really pay attention to these sort of things. It's always going to be, do you do it properly or not? And I've sort of forgot a couple of times to do this whole feast fast thing, and just not eating on the plane and having my first meal as breakfast when I got to my destination. I just didn't have the jet lag, and I didn't need to do this feast fast process when I experimented with it. There's another sort of version of this which is based on 16 hours of fasting, and again basing when you eat on breakfast in your destination. So the idea is you look at breakfast would normally be at 8 o'clock when you're at home, so when you're in your destination time, you'd be ideally having breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning. You count back 16 hours from that point in your destination, and that 16 hour prior is when you should be last eating a meal. And the reason this is kind of like in theory supposed to work is we have a body clock, as we all know, that's derived by sleep and wake. So it's our typical 24-hour body clock, and the theory is that the body clock based on food can override the 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. And for me, there's always going to be people that say, hey, that doesn't work, and they have their own ideas. And I think for me, just trying it's by far the most successful way I've ever found of getting rid of jet lag. And I've given it to business people, bankers, sports people, mechanics, engineers, and all of them report positive results. One of the engineers at Ferrari says it's revolutionised his life because he just doesn't have the jet lag. So whether you believe in it or not, it's just something that's well worth trying, just to kind of see if it works. Because if you can eliminate jet lag by something so simple, it's just a no-brainer not to do it. And what I really like about this whole fasting on the flights is it's so simple to adopt, because all you have to do is not eat on the flight. And I think most people can get their head around that. So you don't have to do anything beforehand. You have to pay attention to when you eat when you get to the other side. And for me, I've played around with different versions. I've tried the 16-hour fast based on the breakfast time. And the only issue I have with that is if you count back from when breakfast should be at your destination 16 hours, sometimes that puts you on the flight. And for me, I find when I eat on the flights, you've got over-processed food, very refined food. It's devoid of most nutrients. Plus the fact our digestive systems don't work so well when we're in the air. So for me, avoiding all of the food on the flights is something that I've had a lot of success with. And I tend to fast sometimes longer than 16 hours, depending on the flight I'm on. Coming to Australia, for example, from Dubai, it's a 13-hour flight. I ate 2 hours before the flight took off. I landed in Melbourne at 9:40 at night, and then I didn't eat anything until breakfast the next morning at around about 7 o'clock. So I guess it was 21 hours that 13... 15, yeah, around about that I fasted for. And did I have no jet lag at all? No. I did have some jet lag because it's a massive time difference in Australia, but the jet lag lasted about a day and a half before I started to feel quite normal. Going for a run, it felt a lot easier than it would do if I was struggling with jet lag, and that's quite normal for me coming to Australia, having played around with all of this sort of stuff. So I think if you're flying somewhere that's not quite so fast, so if it's, I don't know, China for example, same situation there, it's not such a big time difference. And for me in China, I practically have no jet lag at all by doing this. So it's something that's well worth trying for yourself. Of course then, if we look at jet lag as a bigger picture, travelling east tends to be worse than travelling west. The theory with travelling west is we gain a little bit of time, and it's just extending your day. When we travel east, we lose time. So that's one of the theories why travelling east is a little bit harder. If you're travelling over 15 hours, it doesn't really matter whether it's east or west. It's going to be difficult to get into the local time zone. So again, there are going to be factors that will make jet lag better or worse based on which direction you're travelling. The light side of things for me, again, the theory is if you travel east, get exposed to light in the morning, avoid it in the afternoon. If you're travelling west, avoid it in the morning, get it in the afternoon. Again, like I say, it's just not practical. And I think when I'm here, one of the things I do try and do as much as possible, in Australia, you're going to start feeling tired at 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, typically if you come from Europe. And it's just important to be outside doing something quite active at those times. So for me, going for a run outside, I went out for a run when I got here, or the day after I got here. Just did an easy run, did some stair work, did some exercise in the next to the river, and just exposed myself to sunlight. And again, melatonin is something the body naturally releases to dictate when you're going to sleep and when you're going to wake up, and exposing yourself to sunlight at the correct times helps get that system back on track. But personally, I don't really avoid sunlight at any particular time, and again, other people have had a lot of success with doing that, but it's just not something that I've found particularly practical. And the other thing that's important, and what you have to also kind of like take a little bit of planning with, is just looking at what time you're going to arrive. So for example, coming to Australia, if you're arriving at night, like I did, what you want to try and make sure of is you've stayed awake for the last 7 or 8 hours of the flight, just to make sure when you are here you are tired and you want to go to bed. Equally, if you're arriving at 6 o'clock in the morning, you want to make sure the 6, 7, 8 hours before you land you've attempted to at least go to sleep and got some rest. Otherwise it's going to be very difficult to push through the day and stay awake. So like I say, you have to look at it as a bit of an overall plan. You have to create a system that also makes sense. It's not just about not eating on the flight. With regards to when to eat, there's a couple of different ways to do this, and one of those is to base your first meal just on breakfasts. If you're arriving in the morning and you've managed to not eat for, say, 16 hours plus, then have breakfast in the morning when you arrive. If you're arriving in the evening, depending on the time, if you're starving and you've managed not to eat for 16 hours plus, then have an evening meal at the correct time in your destination. But if you can fast then through the night after landing at night, like I did coming to Australia, and have your first meal at breakfast, it's just a good way just to kickstart the system in the morning, because breakfast is breaking the fast and you've been fasting for a period of time leading up to it. I'd say for me the success rate having breakfast as the first meal is higher than eating in the evening, but like I say, both work and both are worth trying. And at the end of the day, if you're absolutely starving, then you're going to eat. I think again with the food issue on the flights, if you take with you some sort of snack based on some sort of healthier nuts, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, or some mix of those, if you really are starving and you really need to eat something healthy like that, as opposed to grabbing a sandwich from the plane or eating the plane food. I think the fasting on the flights thing is really important. The other thing that you can do on the flight, and what is really important to again avoid jet lag, is hydration. Hydration plays a massive role in how we feel, and we focus on hydration a lot with regards to driving, because we know the negative effects of dehydration when it comes to performance. But with regards to dehydration to sort of just normal life, if you're a business traveller and you're flying on business and the time difference is huge, you don't really want to go into a meeting with lack of focus, lack of concentration, brain fog, etc., which all comes from dehydration on the planes. The other thing that's quite interesting with the dehydration as well, if we look at just how the body functions, we're full of just fascia, connective tissue in our body, and when we're hydrated properly, that fascia and the muscles, they move smoothly over one another. And when we're dehydrated, all of those connective tissues, the muscles, they just dry out and they get stuck to each other. So if you've been sitting in a plane seat for 8-9 hours and you get to the destination, you're dehydrated, you feel stiff and achy because you're dehydrated. Nothing's really moving smoothly. And one of the best things you can do is to keep hydrating on the flight. So drink a lot of water while you're flying, and when you get to your destination, drink 1-2 litres of water. And we use rehydration supplementation while we're flying, which again is for hydration but also to boost the immune system. So there's a combination of effects there. But the hydration aspect is important, and like I say, not eating, avoiding alcohol, avoiding coffee, all the other things that are going to dehydrate you play a big role in this as well. So the ebook that I'm writing should be finished in a couple of weeks. It goes into all of these subjects in a lot more detail, gives you the full program of what we do when we travel, and like I say, does it guarantee you're not going to get jet lag? From my point of view, I think Australia is somewhere I get some jet lag, but China, Bahrain, Singapore, my jet lag's non-existent, and I think, like I say, just to try something as simple that's easy to adopt might work for you as well. So give it a try, see how you get on. Like I say, I haven't really given you a full program here, it's just an idea. But like I say, when the ebooks come out, if you're signed up to the website, then you've got an opportunity to get hold of that. Read it through, look at the program we do, and just see if it works for you, even if you're just taking certain elements out of it and putting it into your own program. If you find that helps you then with certain aspects of your travel, fantastic. I'll be making one of these videos at each race based on a different topic. But give me your feedback, ask questions, leave comments. If you've got ways that you found to avoid jet lag, then I'd love to hear them as well. Maybe I can put them into my program and start adapting those solutions if you have them, and go from there. But thank you for listening. It's a bit of a longer video than normal, but it's a huge topic, and like I say, it's one that we can play around with a lot. But anyway, thank you very much, and I will see you in Bahrain.